She arrived at the Callaway Ranch with a physician's satchel, $12, and a reputation so small no one in Harlan Creek had thought to ruin it yet. The boy was already burning with fever, and the man who had sent for her looked at her the way men always did, like the answer they needed could not possibly come in this particular shape. This is not a story about a woman proving herself to a skeptic. It is a story about two people who had both learned to carry their wounds in silence and what happened when they were finally, unavoidably, in the same room. The telegram had said only, "Boy sick. Send someone. Callaway Ranch, 14 miles east." Margaret Voss read it 3 times at the counter of the Harlan Creek post office, where she had gone to collect a letter about her late husband's outstanding accounts which, it turned out, were a great deal more outstanding than she had been informed. She was 31 years old, recently widowed, and in possession of skills the town did not know what to do with. Her father had been a field surgeon during the war. She had been his only student, and in the years following, his only assistant. She had set bones, packed wounds, reduced fevers, and delivered 2 babies in a buffalo grass field before she was 20. None of this appeared on any official document. No certificate bore her name. What she had instead was a ledger of debts, her husband's, mostly, and 40 days before the bank would begin proceedings on the house. The postmistress, a stout woman named Harriet Bowles, who had appointed herself the social conscience of Harlan Creek, watched Margaret fold the telegram with the particular attention of a woman who considers other people's difficulties to be a form of entertainment she is owed. Harriet's expression carried the satisfaction of someone who had always found Margaret Voss slightly too composed for her own good. "There is no doctor available," Margaret said, and that was true. Dr. Peel had gone to Silver Falls for a county medical conference and would not return until Thursday. It was Monday. The postmistress studied her with narrowed eyes. "You are not a doctor." "No." Margaret tucked the telegram into her satchel beside the envelope from the bank. "But the boy is sick now." She hired a wagon from the livery. She did not have the money to spare, but she spent it anyway. The road east was dry and rutted, cutting through open grassland that smelled of sage and dust and the particular sharpness of autumn beginning to sharpen itself against summer's edges. The sky was enormous and pale, and she kept her eyes on the horizon because it was steadier than the road and steadier than the calculations she kept running in the back of her mind. 40 days, the outstanding sum, the interest accumulating regardless. She had heard of Eli Callaway, the way one hears of storms that hit neighboring counties. He had bought the Rafter C 7 years ago, expanded it, lost half the herd in the drought of 78, and rebuilt it without borrowing a dollar or asking a soul for help. He had been married. His wife had died in the 2nd year. He had not remarried. He employed 4 ranch hands and, according to town opinion, kept them at a remove that ensured loyalty without friendship. People respected him in the way they respect a weather-hardened structure, not warmly, but with the understanding that it would still be standing when softer things had given way. He was on the porch when she pulled up. He was taller than she expected and broader through the shoulders, with a jaw that looked like it had been set against saying anything unnecessary. He wore his shirt rolled to the elbows despite the cooling air and held a tin mug as if he had forgotten it was there. His eyes moved over her once, from the top of her traveling hat to the satchel, and came back to her face with an expression that said he had concluded something and was not certain he liked the conclusion. "You are not Dr. Peel, Doctor. Peel is in Silver Falls." "I sent for a doctor." She stepped down from the wagon without assistance. The ground was hard and dry beneath her boots, and the wind pulled at her coat. "You sent for help." "Where is the boy?" He did not move. The mug was still in his hand. She waited. This is not a job for a woman. The words landed plainly, without cruelty, which made them harder to address than if they had been cruel. She looked at him the way her father had taught her to look at anything that might be dangerous, steadily, without flinching, until she understood the shape of it. "I have set 11 broken bones," she said. "I have treated pneumonia, typhoid, and a snake bite that had been ignored for 2 days. Your boy has a fever. Every hour that passes is an hour it can climb higher. If you would rather wait until Thursday for Dr. Peel, I will go back to town and leave you to it. But I am here now, and he is sick now, and I would prefer to help him if you will let me through the door." A long silence. The wind moved through the grass to the south, bending the stalks in a long wave and releasing them. One of the horses at the hitching post shifted its weight, leather creaking. Eli Calloway stepped aside. The boy was 7 years old, and his name was Daniel. He was not Eli Calloway's son by blood. That much was plain from the moment she saw them together. The man standing at the door of the room with his arms crossed, as if his body had made a decision his face had not confirmed. The child tucked beneath blankets that were too thick for the temperature of the room. Daniel was the son of Eli's younger brother, who had died in a rail accident the previous spring, leaving the boy without another living relative in the world. He had been at the ranch for 5 months and had the look of a child who has recently been frightened by something large and has not yet decided whether to trust the new quiet that followed. Margaret set down her satchel and pressed the back of her wrist to Daniel's forehead. Hot, but not dangerously so. Not yet. She listened to his breathing with her ear close to his chest. She checked his throat, his eyes, the lymph nodes along his jaw. She asked him if it hurt to swallow, and he nodded solemnly. She asked him if he could take a breath, and he demonstrated with the careful effort of a child trying to be useful. "Croup," she said. "Not scarlet fever. Not typhoid. His lungs are clear. He needs the fever brought down and his airway kept open through the night." Eli Calloway had not moved from the doorway. He was watching her with an attention she could feel at the back of her neck, steady and unrelenting, the attention of a man who has been told to trust something he has not yet decided to trust and is watching for evidence either way. "He will be all right?" She did not answer immediately, because she had been taught never to promise what she could not verify. She reached into her satchel for the camphor oil and the small jar of willow bark tincture she kept prepared for fevers in the young. If the fever does not climb further and we keep him upright enough to breathe freely, yes, he will likely be well in 3 days. Perhaps 4. A sound from Eli Calloway that was not quite a word. She glanced back at precisely the right moment and caught on his face, for just a breath, something stripped of the hardness he wore everywhere else, something raw and open. The face of a man who had been very afraid and was only now beginning to let the fear become something less sharp. He turned away before she could study it further. The movement was practiced, the way a practiced thing gets done so automatically that the person doing it does not know anymore that they are doing it. She spent that afternoon and evening with Daniel. She brought the fever down with cold compresses and the tincture administered in measured doses every 2 hours. She kept the window cracked despite the chill because the air needed to move, needed to carry the damp warmth of the croup out of the room and replace it with something drier. She taught Daniel, in his more lucid intervals, to sit forward slightly against his pillows because the angle eased the effort of breathing and made his face look less strained. She read to him from a battered copy of Gulliver's Travels she found on the shelf beside the window, in a voice she kept low and even because her father had shown her long ago that even sound could be a kind of medicine for a frightened child, the regularity of it, the proof that something calm was still present in the room. Eli brought supper to the door without being asked. He set the tray on the table in the hall and knocked once and left. She heard his boots on the stairs. She heard him stop halfway down and stand there for a moment in the silence before continuing to the bottom. By 8 o'clock, Daniel was breathing more easily and sleeping without strain. She checked him every half hour. Between checks, she sat in the hard chair by the window with her hands folded in her lap and looked at the dark shape of the barn against the slightly lighter dark of the sky and listened to the ordinary sounds of a working ranch settling into night. A horse, the distant movement of cattle, the low groan of a board in the cold. She did not sleep. At 2 a.m, Eli appeared in the doorway with 2 cups of coffee. He held one out toward her without ceremony, without preamble, without any attempt to narrate the gesture as kindness. She took it. The cup was hot through her gloves, and the coffee inside was strong and slightly burnt, the kind that gets made by a man who does not make coffee for company and has forgotten what company requires. He is breathing better. He was looking at Daniel, not at her. Yes, she warmed her hands around the cup. He should sleep through now. You have been awake since yesterday morning. That was not a question. She considered how he would have known that and decided it was simply a man who observed things and stated what he observed without softening. I am accustomed to it. He stood in the doorway drinking his coffee in a silence that was not uncomfortable, which surprised her. Most silences with strangers required filling, required the application of talk the way people apply plaster to a crack, not because the plaster improves anything, but because the crack is unsettling. This silence did not seem to make that demand. You said 11 bones, he said finally. Yes, not from your husband's practice. My husband was a land surveyor. I learned from my father. He was a surgeon in the war. He nodded once, as though this confirmed something he had already partly known. And where is he now? He died in 74. Fever. She watched his profile in the dark. The line of his jaw, the slight tightening around his eyes that was not, she had come to understand in the hours she had spent in his company, coldness. It was something more controlled than coldness. It was the expression of a man who has learned to let very little through. I am sorry, he said. The words were quiet and direct and contained nothing performed. She had been told she was sorry more times since her husband's death than she could count, and most of those times the words had slid off her like water off oilcloth, more social formula than communication. This time, they did not. Thank you, she said. He finished his coffee and took both cups away, and she did not see him again until morning. Daniel was cooler by dawn. He asked for water, then for breakfast, and then asked whether the frog he had found yesterday was still in the creek or if the cold had moved it. Margaret took this as the most reliable indicator of recovery she knew. A child whose mind has returned to the things that matter to children. She checked him again at 7 and pronounced the fever broken. She showed Eli's housekeeper, a soft-spoken Tajano woman named Petra, whose steady competence ran the household without noise or complaint, how to make the steam tent with the kettle and a blanket if the croup tightened again in the night. She packed her satchel. Eli was in the yard when she came out, talking in low tones to his foreman, a weathered man named Grady, who had the eyes of someone who had seen a great deal of weather and developed opinions about most of it. Both men stopped when she appeared on the step. She named what she would charge. It was what she would have charged for a night's professional attendance, stated plainly and without apology. Eli looked at her for a moment. Then he named a figure that was higher. She paused. That is more than I asked. You were here all night. He said it the way he said most things, as a simple mathematical fact, not an assessment of her virtue. She decided not to argue. She had 40 days and the bank was not interested in her dignity about money. She was 3 steps toward the wagon when he spoke again. My housekeeper's daughter has a cough that is not resolved in 3 weeks. She stopped. I would not impose on your time without fair compensation. Margaret set her satchel on the wagon seat and turned. She looked at him across the length of the yard. He was standing with his thumbs hooked in his belt, and his face was not asking anything from her. He was simply presenting a fact, the way a man states a fence needs mending. No performance attached, no appeal. "Bring her to the house," she said. "I will come back Wednesday." She drove back through the sage in the morning light, feeling something she had not felt in a long time. Not hope, exactly, but something quieter and more durable, something with a floor beneath it. She came back Wednesday. Petra's daughter was 11, dark-eyed and thin-wristed, and her name was Rosa. The cough had started 6 weeks ago and had not broken. Margaret listened to the child's chest in the kitchen where the iron stove threw warm air and the smell of corn tortillas moved through the room like a benediction nobody had announced. She heard what she needed to hear, not the deep, wet rasp of something serious, but the shallower, persistent irritation of airways that had been inflamed and not rested. Not consumption. A persistent inflammation from breathing chaff during the harvest season. She mixed a preparation from her herbs and left instructions for a steam treatment twice daily and a specific diet that avoided anything drying. Eli watched from across the kitchen. He had come in from the yard without removing his hat and stood with his back to the counter and his arms crossed, not pretending not to watch. "How long has she been coughing?" she asked, without looking up from the treatment chart she was making in her notebook. 6 weeks. "And you waited 6 weeks." He was quiet for a moment. "I did not know how bad it was. It was not a reproach. I ask only so I know what I am treating." She looked up when she finished the chart. She found him watching her with an expression she could not readily categorize. Not hostility, not warmth, something in between those two territories that had its own specific weight and was neither trespassing toward the other. She told Rosa to open her mouth. This is Dusty Vows, where stories like hers live. Women who brought something real to a place that had not expected them, and men who had to revise everything they thought they knew. If you want the next story the moment it arrives, subscribe now. Then, back to the ranch, she returned the following Wednesday and the Wednesday after. Rosa's cough improved across the first week and then resolved entirely by the end of the second. Daniel's color came back until he looked fully himself again, rosy-cheeked and relentlessly curious. Following Margaret through the house on her visits with the dedicated attention of a child who has decided someone is interesting and wants to understand why. He asked her the name of each instrument in her satchel and what it did and how it did it. She answered every question completely, without shortening the answer because he was young. Her father had done the same for her, and she had never forgotten it. It was on the third Wednesday that she arrived to find the situation altered. Grady met her at the gate with his hat in his hands, which was the posture of a man who is about to deliver something he would rather not carry. "There has been trouble," he said, "in town." She waited. "Mr. Renner came by the post office. He told Mrs. Bowles you have been making regular visits to the ranch. Charles Renner." She knew the name the way a woman knows the names of storms she has been warned about. Her husband had borrowed money from Renner's lending operation, the kind of lending that charged 30% and came with terms written in small type and explained in smaller words. She had been managing his letters since Arthur died, letters that grew progressively less polite and more specific about what would follow a failure to comply. "And Mrs. Bowles spread this around," she said. "Yes, ma'am." The word he used, Grady looked uncomfortable, a discomfort that was genuine and therefore informative. He said you were using your access to a grieving household to make yourself indispensable. He implied you had a motive other than medicine. She stood very still in the October air. The word he had implied was one that had a long reach and stuck to a woman's reputation like burrs to wool and came off about as easily. "Where is Mr. Calloway?" "North pasture." "He doesn't know yet." She thanked Grady and went inside to see Daniel, who was entirely well and wanted to show her the frog he had found in the creek. She admired the frog. She helped him find a suitable jar. She listened to his explanation of why the frog preferred the left side of the jar and not the right. She kept her hands steady and her face clear and her thoughts arranged in a calm line because panic was a luxury she had never been able to afford and saw no reason to start purchasing now. She was in the kitchen writing her final notes for Petra when Eli came in from the yard. She knew from the set of his shoulders that Grady had spoken to him before he reached the door. He hung his hat on the peg. He walked to the sink and washed his hands with deliberate care, using the familiar motions of ordinary work to get his face organized into something he could present without it being a problem for either of them. She recognized the strategy because she used it herself. "Renner came to the post office," he said. "Yes," Grady told me. He turned. His eyes were level and very direct. "What Renner said?" "I know what he implied." A long pause. The stove ticked through its heat. Somewhere outside a horse moved and leather shifted. "He does not know what he is talking about," Eli said. She waited. There was something else in his face that had not finished arranging itself. "He has a claim on Arthur Voss's estate," she said quietly. "I have been disputing the terms since August. He would prefer I had less credibility in this county when the matter goes before the lending committee." Eli was quiet for a moment. He walked to the window and looked out at the yard. His hands were clasped behind his back, the posture of a man imposing order on himself. "How much does he claim you owe?" She told him. She had not meant to say it with such precision, but the number came out of her plainly, the way things come out when you have been carrying them alone long enough that the weight has become ordinary and the concealment of it is what has become exhausting. He turned from the window. Nothing in his face moved, but she had the distinct sensation that something behind it had shifted in a direction she had not anticipated. "That is a manageable number," he said. "For you, perhaps." He said nothing to that. He picked up his hat from the peg and turned it once in his hands, looking at the crown of it the way men look at things when they are thinking about something other than the thing in their hands. "Renner will be at the town meeting Thursday," he said. "He sits on the lending committee. He likes an audience for what he considers victories." "I know." He set the hat back on the peg. His jaw was set in a way that told her he had decided something, though he had not yet said what. "Be at the meeting," he said. "I will be there." She drove back to town through the early dark with the cold coming off the plains and the first stars beginning to show. And she thought about the arithmetic of a proud and solitary man deciding to step into something that was not his fight, with no stated reason and no request for gratitude. Thursday's town meeting was held in the back of the Harlan Creek Mercantile, which smelled of raw pine and dried beans and the kerosene that fueled the overhead lamps. Margaret arrived 3 minutes before the meeting began and took a seat at the back. Harriet Bowles saw her from across the room and made no effort to disguise the assessment moving through her expression, a comprehensive audit that ended without a visible verdict. Charles Renner was already seated near the front. He was a well-dressed man in his 50s, the kind of well-dressed that advertises what it cost, with a thick neck and a way of occupying a chair as if he had purchased it along with the room. He nodded at her with the specific confidence of a man who has already decided how the evening will go. The meeting's formal business took 20 minutes. Gravel rights. A bridge repair on the East Road. A dispute over a property line that both parties had agreed to defer until spring. Then the floor opened, and Renner rose. He was careful. He said nothing she could directly refute in isolation. He spoke about professional standards in matters of public health. He spoke about the vulnerability of households in mourning. He spoke about widows who might, in desperation, seek to make themselves necessary to established households in ways that benefited them financially. He did not name her. He did not have to. 3/4 of the room had heard Harriet Bowles's version already. The room listened with the quality of listening that meant it was deciding something. She was composing her response. Clear, factual, unhurried. When the door at the back of the Mercantile opened, Eli Calloway walked in. He was not dressed for a social occasion. He was dressed for the work he had come from, which made his entrance considerably harder to dismiss than if he had worn his Sunday coat and prepared a speech. He walked to the front of the room without hurry and without apology for the interruption, and he stood where he could be seen by both Renner and every person assembled. "Mrs. Voss," he said, and his voice filled the room without effort, not loud, simply present the way voices are present when the person speaking has decided to be precisely clear. "She saved my nephew's life on a Monday night in October when no other medical help was available in this county. She stayed awake through the night. She charged me a fair rate and not $1 over." He looked at Renner with an expression that contained nothing except certainty. Any suggestion otherwise is an invention by a man with an interest in her discrediting. The room went quiet. Renner adjusted his cufflinks with the practiced calm of a man accustomed to setbacks that he intends to reclassify as temporary. What Mr. Calloway has to say about his domestic arrangements is between himself and his conscience. It is also, Eli said, between himself and his attorney, given that the compounding interest provisions in your lending contracts with the Voss estate were not disclosed at signing, which my attorney will be discussing with the lending committee directly. The silence in the room changed in quality. Renner's face changed with it. She had not known he intended to say that. She had not known he had looked at Renner's claim at all. She sat very still in the back of the Mercantile and felt something shift in the room, not dramatically, but actually. The meeting ended shortly after. People departed in the clusters that form when a room has witnessed something it is still working to understand. Harriet Bowles caught Margaret at the door. Her expression had reorganized itself into something that was not warm. Harriet Bowles did not do warm, but had revised itself. "That Renner," she said, "has always had a very high opinion of his own arithmetic." She moved past without a response, which was itself an acknowledgment. Eli found her outside in the street. "You looked at his claim," she said. He did not deny it. He stood in the cold with his breath showing faintly in the lamp light from the Mercantile window, his coat open despite the temperature. "You did not tell me you were doing it. There was nothing to tell yet. There may be something to tell by next week." She studied him. He was harder to read in the dark and cold than in the daylight of the ranch, but she had already begun to understand the architecture of his reserve, where the walls were solid and where they were merely tall. "You did not have to do that," she said. He looked at her steadily. No, he did not add to it. She pulled her coat closed against the wind. The silence between them was very full. "Thank you," she said. The words were not sufficient, and she knew it. And she thought he knew it too, and was deciding not to require anything more sufficient from her. He nodded once. He walked to his horse. He came back the following Monday without sending a telegram first. She was in the back room of her rented house, sorting through the last of Arthur's papers for anything that might establish the compounding error in Renner's contract as a documented breach. The knock at the front door was firm and evenly spaced. She found Eli Calloway on the step with his hat in his hand and snow beginning to fall in light flakes behind him. The first serious snow of the season drifting down through the gray afternoon in no particular hurry. She brought him into the kitchen, which was the only room adequately warm. She put water on the stove. He sat at the kitchen table in a way that made the table seem like a smaller piece of furniture than it was, and he set a folded document in front of her. "My attorney found it," he said. "A notation in the original lending registry. Renner failed to disclose the compounding provision at signing. It is a violation of the terms established by the County Lending Committee in '75. She read the document. 6 pages. She read all of it carefully the first time, and then read the critical sections again to be certain she was understanding what she was reading. This relieves approximately 2/3 of what he claims I owe. Yes, she folded her hands on the table. The water was heating on the stove. The snow came down properly now through the kitchen window, the flakes larger and more committed. The room smelled of coal dust and the dried lavender she kept in a cracked cup on the sill because her father had kept dried lavender on every surface within reach, and she had never broken the habit. "You have been working on this since Thursday," she said. He looked at her with the level attention that was his form of candor. He did not confirm or deny it. She felt something constrict in her chest, not painfully, almost the opposite, the sensation of something long held tight being offered the option of letting go. "Eli," she stopped. She was not a woman who struggled to locate words. This was a different difficulty, the kind that comes when the emotion behind the words has not yet organized itself into anything language can carry without spilling. He waited with the patience of a man who has learned that the things worth waiting for require exactly that. "I do not know how to accept this kind of help gracefully," she said finally. Something crossed his face. Not quite a smile. The place where a smile would be if he permitted it. "Neither do I," he said. She poured the water. The tea she made was strong and slightly wrong, and he drank it without comment. They sat in the kitchen while the snow accumulated outside and the lamp burned down, and she told him about her father, about the years she had spent learning in the back of his practice and then in the field, setting fractures and cleaning wounds and learning to listen to a body the way you listen to anything that cannot speak directly about what is wrong with it. And he told her, in the incomplete way of a man not accustomed to telling things, about Daniel's father James, about the telegram that had arrived in May and the boy who had arrived 3 weeks after that, with his small bag and his grief already packed inside him like stones in a coat lining, and how Eli had stood at the door of the spare room that first night and not known a single thing to say. "He is adjusting," Eli said. "He is happy," she said. He looked at her across the table. "The boy is happy," she said. "You may not see it because you are watching for signs of unhappiness, but he showed me his frog. He named it after a general." He was quiet. Then, not a smile, but the geography of where a smile would live if he permitted it to exist. "General Sherman," he said. She laughed. It surprised her. She had not laughed in some time, not a real laugh, the kind that arrives without deciding to. He looked at her when she laughed and did not look away for a long moment. She became aware of the look, and became aware that she was not uncomfortable with it, which was information of a particular kind. By the time he left, the snow was several inches deep. She watched him ride out from the window and stood in the lamp-lit kitchen for a time after he had gone, looking at the 2 cups on the table and the document he had brought her, and thinking about the deliberate and patient effort of a man who had gone looking for something that would help her when she had not asked him to. The threat came on a gray Wednesday in early November. Renner had not accepted the attorney's notification quietly. She had expected escalation. She had not anticipated the specific form, which came not through legal channels, but through a young ranch hand named Cole. thin-faced and careful in the way of someone delivering a message he is not certain he wants to survive delivering. Cole appeared at the Calloway gate while Margaret was inside wrapping a clean linen bandage around Grady's hand, which he had opened on a fence wire 3 days earlier and had been treating with the particular stubbornness of men who consider medical attention a concession. She heard raised voices from outside. Then, Eli's voice, lower than the others, more precisely controlled. She finished the bandage. She told Grady what to watch for and when to worry. Then she went outside. Cole was gone. Eli stood at the gate in the pewter gray light, with his face arranged in the controlled expression of something that had moved through anger and been reduced to a colder and more useful temperature. "What did he say?" she asked. He turned. "Renner intends to contest the lending registry document as a forgery. He will find witnesses willing to testify that the notation was added after the fact." He looked at her directly. "And the claim of forgery will include testimony suggesting the document was procured through personal manipulation, suggesting your relationship to this household is not professional." She absorbed this. She turned it in her mind. "If I refuse to withdraw from the lending dispute." He challenges the registry. He finds a sympathetic magistrate. The compounding claim is restored to its full amount. She looked at the flat gray sky. The wind moved through the dry November grass in the south pasture with a long, low sound that was not quite mournful, but was not cheerful either. "He is trying to establish that his pressure works," she said. "Yes," she looked at Eli. He was watching her the way he always watched her, with the attention of a man who waits for evidence before deciding. "If I withdraw its signals, I can be moved," which means he will use the same method on the next thing he wants from me. He said nothing. He did not need to. "No," she said. One nod. Clean and immediate. "Then we need something that makes the magistrate option too costly for him to pursue," she said. "Something that removes his room to maneuver before he is moved. Tell me everything your attorney has on Renner's other active contracts in this county, and bring me Arthur's original loan documentation. All of it. Every page." The silence lasted 2 beats. She saw him register the shift, the way she had moved from receiving information to architecture, laying out the structure of a response before he had fully arrived at the problem. And she saw in his face the particular quality of a man encountering something he had not accounted for and is revising his account in real time. The corner of his mouth moved. He brought her the documentation within the hour. She spent the next 4 days in her kitchen. She read through Arthur's files and the county lending registry records Eli's attorney provided. She read everything twice and made charts in her notebook and cross-referenced dates and signatures and figures with the methodical patience her father had taught her, not assuming what she would find. She slept in short intervals and ate the covered dishes Petra sent over, warm food arriving without announcement like a form of faith that the work being done was worth sustaining. On the 4th day she found it. 3 contracts, issued in the same month, all carrying the same undisclosed compounding provision. 3 different borrowers, 3 different ranching families, all still active. The same violation, repeated with the confidence of a man who had done it once without consequence and concluded consequence, was not coming. She rode to Eli's attorney's office in the first hard snow of the season and laid the evidence on his desk. He studied it for a long time without speaking. "This is a pattern," he said. Yes, and a documented pattern of the same violation, reported to the county lending committee, creates a different kind of problem for Mr. Renner than a single dispute over one estate. It invites a review of his entire operation. The attorney looked at her over his spectacles with the expression of a man whose assumptions have been overtaken by events. "Where did you learn to read contracts this way?" he said. "From the man who wrote them." She was thinking of her father, who had told her that any document you were asked to sign deserved to be understood by the person signing it. He had considered that a medical principle and a civic one in equal proportion. She told Eli that evening. He was in the barn working in the last gray light on a section of harness that needed resewing, the needle moving through the leather with the steady rhythm of something done so many times it no longer required thought. He kept his hands on the work while she described the 3 contracts and the pattern and what it meant for Renner's ability to pursue the magistrate option. He did not interrupt. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. He set the harness down. 3 contracts, she said again. The same violation, documented across 3 active accounts. If the other families are willing to file alongside your attorney's complaint, Renner cannot pursue me without the committee reviewing everything he has done in this county for the past decade. It is not a certainty he backs down. No, but the cost of pursuing me becomes greater than anything he can gain from it. And men like Renner, she said, make decisions by arithmetic. He was holding her gaze and she was holding his, and the barn was quiet around them, the horses breathing in the dark stalls, the cold coming through the boards and thin fingers, the smell of hay and leather, and the particular stillness of November when the earth has given up its warmth for the season and has not yet decided to regret it. You did this in 4 days, he said. She had been about to say it was nothing complex. She stopped herself, because it had not been nothing. She had worked until her eyes ached and slept in her coat rather than stop long enough to feed the fire. Yes, she said. He did not say anything more immediately. His hands were still on the harness. He did not reach for it again. The barn was quiet enough that she could hear the snow outside, the particular whispered density of it falling in the dark. Margaret, he said. She waited. It was the first time he had said her given name aloud, without the formality of Mrs. Voss in front of it, and it landed in the barn with the weight of something that had been true for some time and was only now being said. She felt the weight of it in her chest, not unpleasantly. What would you need, he said, to stay? The barn was very still. One of the horses exhaled slowly, and the sound of it was the sound of something continuing. She understood what he was asking, the practical dimensions and the ones beneath them. She understood also that it had cost him something to ask, at the cost of a man who has taught himself not to ask. She thought about what she needed. She had spent so long without it that the inventory was unfamiliar. Time, she said, to do it properly. He nodded. His hands moved to the harness and then away from it again, as if he had reached for it by habit and then remembered it was not what he was talking about. There is a room, he said. The east end. It has good morning light. She had seen that room. She had noticed the light on her first visit and thought about it more than once since. She let the silence sit. Not because she was uncertain, but because she wanted the word to carry the same precision as his had when he said her name. Yes, she said. He picked up the harness. She could see in the set of his shoulders the very small releasing that happens when something uncertain has been made certain. She had learned his face by then. Renner withdrew his contest before Christmas. The county lending committee opened a review of his operation in January. 2 of the 3 affected ranching families filed alongside Eli's attorney. The 3rd was persuaded by the 2nd, which had always been how these things moved, not everyone first, but momentum gathering once something has been set in motion by someone willing to go first. She moved her satchel to the east room on the first Saturday of December. Her examination equipment came the following week, and the week after that the medical texts she had carried from her father's shelves, wrapped in oilcloth against the weather. Daniel helped carry the books. He held each one with a gravity specific to him, the seriousness of a child who treats things carefully because he has been shown by example that things deserve care. She knew where he had learned it. She had watched Eli read in the evenings when he thought no one was looking, with the lamp drawn close and his reading glasses on and his entire face altered by the quietness of what he was doing. Something soft in it that his waking face kept contained. She did not tell him she had seen it. Some things are most important when they remain private. Her practice grew across the winter. Grady recommended her to a neighboring ranch family, and the neighboring ranch's cook had a sister in town, and by February she had a standing arrangement with 3 households and a steady stream of individual patients who came through the side gate to the East Room. Word moved through a county the way it always moved. Not through advertisement, but through the testimony of people who had been helped and said so. Eli built her an examination table in March. He built it across evenings in the barn and said nothing about it until it was finished. She found it one morning when she came in to check on a mare that had been coughing, the table standing in the good light from the high south window, planed smooth, exactly the right height, with 2 drawers on the right side fitted with iron pulls and a low rail at the foot precisely sized for a stool. She stood with her hand on the surface. The wood was new and faintly rough with its first grain, warm from the morning light. She went to find him. He was in the south pasture. She walked out through the frost-stubbled grass in the March morning, with the air carrying the first uncertain suggestion of warmth, and he saw her coming from a distance and watched her come without turning back to his work. She stopped a few feet from him. She had been thinking about words all the way across the yard and had not found any that seemed equal to what needed to be said, which was not a situation she was accustomed to finding herself in. He waited. He did not try to fill the space before she was ready. He had never done that, she realized. In all the months of this arrangement, he had never tried to fill a silence that was hers to fill. "You measured the height," she said. "I watched you work," he said. "The table in the East Room is too low for your height. You compensate for it without noticing." She thought about what it meant, not the table, but the observation behind the table, the long and sustained and quiet attention of a man who had looked at her working and noticed something she had not mentioned and had then done something about it in wood and iron and the evenings after his other work. She thought about how she had spent her whole working life surrounded by people who saw her knowledge without seeing her, and how different it was to be seen the other way around first. "Eli," she said. His face changed. It was subtle, the way real things are subtle, the change of a man who has been holding something carefully for a long time and is beginning, not releasing yet, but beginning, to believe that what he is holding might be safe to hold differently. She stepped forward. She put her hand against his chest. She felt the steadiness of him through the worn cotton of his shirt, the slow beat, the held breath. He looked down at her hand. He covered it with his. His hand was large and work roughened and very warm and entirely steady. They stood in the frost-bright morning with the wind moving through the dry grass around them and the sky enormous and clear overhead, the kind of clear that arrives after a long season of weather when the air has finally spent itself. He said her name again, quietly, the way you say something when you are making it true rather than announcing it. It was the 3rd time he had said it. She had counted. She had known from the first time that she would. This one carried what the previous 2 had not had room for. She looked up at him. He did not say anything more. He did not reach for words. He pressed her hand against his chest, and she felt his breathing settle into something slower and more open, the breathing of a man who has been braced against cold that is finally ended. She did not move. The plains stretched out to every horizon, wide and quiet. She proved that what a woman knows can save more than one life in the same house. He chose her with his hands first, and with his words last, and with everything in between that neither of them had language for.